Part 11. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 101. After Hikaru Kurosawa had lunch with them, he said that he had something to do in the afternoon and would go ahead. There are a lot of documents and things to do when opening a company. It doesn't just happen, it takes time to prepare. At 12:50, Kurosawa took a taxi and arrived at his destination. Guest, your designated wind-chasing dojo has arrived. Please bring your belongings with you. Thank you, I brought everything. At the driver's reminder, Kurosawa thanked him and got out of the car. In front of you is a large ancient house. Even the walls are different from modern houses. They are very high walls. Next to the gate, there is a plaque with 4 large calligraphy characters Zufeng Dojo written on it. This mansion is very large, and there is a large open space in front of the house for parking. It looks so antique. After examining it for a few times, Kurosawa Hikaru carried a bag, straightened his clothes, walked forward and rang the doorbell. After waiting for 2 minutes, the door was opened. It was a middle-aged woman wearing a blue and white kimono, with her hair tied up, dignified and well-groomed. Oh, I don't know why the guests are here. The kimono woman glanced at Kurosawa Hikari, a little surprised, and asked with a smile on her lips. Her surprise was as if she had seen some strange guest, and her voice was very gentle. Hello, I am Hikaru Kurosawa from the entire school company. I would like to come to Zuifeng Dojo to visit and study. You respect me 3 feet, I respect you 3 feet, Kurosawa Hikaru smiled slightly and explained. Does the guest have any letters of recommendation? When the kimono woman heard the name, she had no impression at all and asked immediately. Letter of recommendation. When Kurosawa Hikaru heard the statement, he was immediately confused. Yes, Sato Kyuden does not allow others to enter his dojo without a letter of recommendation. The kimono woman held her cheek with one hand and explained awkwardly. Miss Sifenjayuan and I are friends. Can I introduce you? Realizing the situation, Kurosawa Hikaru thought for a while and asked again. I don't have a letter of recommendation and I'm not on the reservation list. Guests are usually not allowed in. I'm very sorry. Please come back. The attitude of the kimono woman has always been gentle and soft-spoken. After saying that, she nodded and closed the door. The door was closed, Kurosawa Hikaru was turned away, and the whole person was stunned. Didn't it mean that just joining the all-student company would be enough? Why aren't people allowed in to visit? What to do? If he can't get in, how will he keep the appointment? And now there are only a few minutes left before the agreed 13 o'clock. I should ask for my contact information. Kurosawa Hikaru was stunned for a while, then started walking back and forth with a headache. He was not allowed to enter without a letter of recommendation. The key was that he could not contact Sifenjayuan in future. In fact, he can still contact her, but it's more troublesome. For example, he can contact Sifenjayuan's future through Sifenjayuan's mother, but how dare he? Standing still was not an option. After thinking about it, Kurosawa Hikaru turned on his phone and found Ninomiya Chizuru's line and sent her a message. Do you have Mr. Yosuji's phone number? In his mobile phone, he only has the contact information of Mr. Ninomiya. After all, he is a teacher and is responsible for various affairs during his college years. As for Mr. Yosuji, his full name is Yosuji Masaki, and he is the coach and club teacher of the Todai Kyoto Club. No, but I can find him. Don't you have something to do this afternoon? Why are you looking for him? I have something I want to ask him about. It's urgent. Hold on. Ninomiya Chizuru didn't ask any more questions, just responded. Not long after, she sent a series of numbers. Thank you. After replying, Kurosawa Hikaru immediately made a call. Teacher Yosuji, I am Hikaru Kurosawa. The phone responded more than a dozen times, and it was considered connected. Kurosawa Hikaru reported the origin immediately. Kurosawa Hikaru. I was just looking for you. You have to come to the Kyoto Club to report and study with everyone on the weekend. Even if your archery talent is very strong, you know too little about Kyoto and you must polish the basics. Yosuji Masaka was surprised by his call and immediately became energetic. I want to meet Sato 9th Dan, but I need a letter of recommendation to enter the Wind Chase Dojo. Can you help me find a way? Why would you want to meet him? Can you help me get in? I'm right in front of the door of Zuifeng Dojo, but I can't get in. I'm in a hurry. Sato 9th Dan is a national treasure in the Neon Kyoto world, it's not easy to meet him. Yosuji Masaka's tone was a bit awkward. How can you help me? I'm in a hurry. If you have anything to say, I might as well just say it. Kurosawa Hikaru had an intuition that he must have a way, he was just negotiating, he said simply. Originally, if he had successfully entered, he would have met with Siphon Jiyuan in the future. But in just a short while, it was already 12:58, and it would be considered late in a few minutes. The longer it was delayed, the worse it would be. Hey, there's still half a month left, isn't it time for summer vacation? August 10th is the National University Archery Competition. I hope you can spare half a month during the summer vacation to compete and receive guidance. Seeing that he was very knowledgeable, Masaka Yosuji smiled knowingly and said. Half a month? It's too long. I'm very busy. 3 days at most. Kurosawa Hikaru couldn't help but frown when he heard this condition. The next summer vacation should be his career development period, and it is hard to say what arrangements he will make at that time. In addition, he still has to face the dating task, and half a month is too long. Then 3 days. Yosuji Masaki has no objection to this time. This child is extremely talented, as long as he is willing to learn. Okay, please help me find a way to let me in. Kurosawa Hikaru thought about it and agreed. 3 days, and it is also in the summer vacation, it should be possible to arrange it. Today's dating task is very important, such as the piano reward, which can upgrade his piano to the proficient level. In contrast, perfect archery is not so necessary, because it is really useless in daily life and a bit tasteless. And he has made an appointment with Shiffen Jiyuan Mirai, it would be bad if he broke the appointment. Wait a minute, I'll change my clothes and drive over right away. After getting his verbal agreement, Yosuji Masaka said immediately. You're coming over? Can't you just call me and let me in? To see Sato 9th Dan, you either need to be a celebrity in the archery world, or have a letter of recommendation and invitation, or you need to be an acquaintance or a disciple. Your teacher is Yosuji 6th Dan, who is quite famous. I've met him a few times, and if you show your identity, he can take you in. How long will it take? Kurosawa Hikaru was a little anxious. He really didn't expect that entering an archery dojo would be so troublesome. I'm still in school. It's about as long as it takes to get from Tokyo University to the Chuifeng dojo. Please hurry up. I know you're in a hurry, but don't worry. Do you want to enter the dojo just to visit, or do you want to shoot arrows? If you want to shoot arrows, have you brought all the tools? I want to shoot arrows, so I brought a finger guard, but nothing else. Kurosawa Hikaru looked down at the bag he was carrying and said. The last time he went to the archery club, he borrowed the club's tools because he didn't have anything. At that time, he heard that the finger guard is a must for Kyoto, so he went to a related store before coming and bought a deerskin finger guard for more than 60,000 yen. Then I'll bring the things over for you. Okay. Kurosawa nodded, looked up at the gate, and then looked at the high wall next to it. In fact, he could use parkour to climb over the wall, but doing so would be illegal entry, so he had to give up the idea. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 102. In the Zuifeng dojo, Shifunjin Mirai, wearing a hakama suit and her black hair tied into a high ponytail, giving off an elegant and beautiful look, was shooting arrows. Beep. Concentrate and don't get distracted. Beep. 2 consecutive arrows missed the target and sank into the gray unto. Take a rest. Seeing this scene, Sato Kyuden next to him frowned and shouted. Sato Kyuden is now 74 years old, with black hair and white temples, no beard, his face has long been left traces of time, and there are many wrinkles, but his body is still upright and strong, wearing a black kimono, he looks quite impressive. Yes. Hearing this, Sifeng nodded in the future, slowly drew back his bow, strolled towards the wall, and sat down. Future, what's wrong with you? It's not like you to miss the target continuously, and you have already missed the target 12 times today. Is there anything bothering you? Sato Kyuden walked next to her and asked. There's nothing to worry about. Thank you, teacher, for your concern. Shifunjin Mirai shook his head slightly, and couldn't help but glance at the entrance of the archery dojo. It is already 13:30, and several brothers and sisters are coming to the dojo one after another. There was a huge age difference between these brothers and sisters. The youngest ones were all in their 30s, and the oldest ones were even 55 years old. She has been a disciple of Sato 9th Dan since she was a child, so she is quite senior in terms of seniority. Who are you waiting for? Sato Kyuden noticed her sight and gaze and asked immediately. Kyoto pays attention to the state of mind, and a normal mind is also a kind of strength. As a veteran who has been in the archery world for many years, he is very sensitive to this kind of emotional change. Unlike last week, today's little apprentice is very confused and cannot be as calm as before. After his thoughts were revealed, Shifunjin Mirai was shocked and subconsciously looked at Sayaka Akai not far away, for fear of being heard by her. I'm not waiting for anyone. Seeing that the maid's expression didn't change, as if she didn't hear anything, Shifunjin Mirai whispered. Is she waiting for someone? That must be waiting. Arriving at the dojo at 7:30 in the morning, while having breakfast, she couldn't help but wonder when Kurosawa Hikaru would come, and she was a little distracted with anticipation. But as the time for personal instruction ended, other brothers and sisters entered the dojo one after another. However, Kurosawa Hikaru was nowhere to be seen, and her expectations began to turn into worry. I'm definitely waiting for someone, and I'm waiting for a man. Sato Kyuden narrowed his eyes and thought to himself when he saw her reaction. Upon noticing this, his mind immediately sank, and his eyes became sharper. Because when the future was 8 years old, he became his teacher and watched the child grow up. He had already regarded the future as half a granddaughter. Now, in the 3rd year of high school, even at an age when the time for practicing archery has been reduced, which man has caught the heart of little future? Teacher, can all the Kyoto players from the school company enter the venue? At this moment, Shifunjin couldn't help but ask in the future. Cannot. But there weren't a few players from the entire school company who came to visit before. That's because their coach is friends with me and asked them to come visit and learn a few times. I can't meet just anyone. Sato Kyuden explained with a smile, but there was no smile in that smile. Are the players from the Kwanshui company also college students? When was it? Which player is it again? What to do? Falling in love is very difficult to do. According to this situation, if he can't solve this longing, then the future Kyoto training may not be effective. Realizing this situation, Shifunjin felt a little relieved in the future, but also a little distressed. What's reassuring is that Kurosawa Hikaru hasn't shown up yet, so it's not like he broke the promise. The distressing thing is that because of her misjudgment, Kurosawa Hikaru was probably turned away and not allowed to come in. What to do? Want to go out and have a look? But if you do this, the maid will definitely see it. If she reports it to her parents, she will think that they have agreed to meet in private, and she doesn't know how she will react. Sato 9th Dan and Yosuji 6th Dan brought their students to visit. At this moment, a middle-aged man wearing a shirt and trousers walked in from the entrance of the archery dojo and said with a smile. Next to him, there was a boy with black hair and black eyes, a handsome appearance and an extraordinary temperament, carrying a satchel. As they arrived, Siphon Jiyuan glanced subconsciously in the future, and then fixed his eyes on the boy. He was a little unbelievable, but more of a surprise. Is it him? With such an obvious reaction, Sato Kyuden took one look and focused on the boy. Judging from his handsome appearance, he is about 20 years old, but he has an extraordinary temperament and a sense of gentleness and dignity. Yosuji 6th Dan teaches at the Kyoto Club of Tokyo University. Since he is his student, he is also a student of the Super University of Tokyo University. The walking posture is straight and upright, the pace is steady, and it seems that he has a foundation in archery. Yosuji, this is a rare visitor. Why did he come so suddenly? Although he realized that this boy was the one the young apprentice was waiting for, Sato 9th Dan still remained calm and smiled immediately. Because I, a student, have long heard about the power of Zuifen Dojo, and I want to come and experience it. Masaki Yosuji was also laughing. As the two coaches met and started to communicate, Kurosawa Hikaru, who was standing next to them, also looked at Shifen Jiyuan Mirai. The two looked at each other, and although they didn't say anything, they were communicating with their eyes. Kurosawa Hikaru was smiling, which made Shifen Jiyuan Mirai smile. Everything was self-evident. Although they were late, they finally met successfully. It was really difficult for them to meet outside the tutoring class. With his arrival, Akai Sayaka, who was standing on the other side, found that they were looking at each other. After a few glances, they looked away without saying a word. Both of them were paying close attention to her movements. As expected, Miss Akai doesn't really want to be so strict, but it's her duty to follow her. Kurosawa Hikaru realized something when he noticed her turning her head. In fact, he had suspected it before, but it was difficult to judge because there was no evidence. Now the turning of her head was undoubtedly ironclad evidence. Hello, I'm Kurosawa Hikaru. Realizing Ms. Akai's magnanimity, Kurosawa Hikaru also plucked up the courage, walked to the side of Shifen Jiyuan Mirai, stretched out his hand and introduced himself. Hello, I'm Shifen Jiyuan Mirai. Siphon Jiyuan Mirai, who was sitting in the seat, was stunned when she heard the words, glanced at the maid, and found that she was not looking at this side. It seemed that she pretended not to think. After hesitating for a few seconds, she still plucked up the courage to stand up. However, she stretched out her left hand, because her right hand was still wearing a deerskin glove. Holding the two hands, palms touching, this was their first physical contact. Shifen Jiyuan Mirai felt that his palm was so big, as if it could completely cover her hand, and her heartbeat accelerated a little. This meeting was very special. It was different from the relationship in the tutoring class in the past. It was in an occasion outside that place, just like the first meeting of two people, and there was no longer a barrier of identity. It's really hard to see you. Holding her slightly cold little hand, Kurosawa Hikaru lowered his head slightly and whispered. But you still saw it? Shifen Jiyuan Mirai also felt that he had worked hard, but when he heard this complaint, he curled his lips and was a little happy. 2 more updates are here. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 103. I will definitely be there if there is an appointment. Kurosawa Hikaru held her hand, feeling very happy. Although he had to spend 3 days of his summer vacation, he was still there as promised. I will be late, but I will definitely be there. This statement was like a guarantee, which made Shifunjayuan Mirai a little happy. The promise made after actually doing something is more convincing. Yes. Let go quickly, it will be bad if the teacher reports you. Finding that he still nodded in agreement, Shifunjayuan Mirai suddenly felt a little embarrassed, shook his arm, and pulled it back. Kurosawa, come and meet Sato Kyuden, this is a national treasure level master of neon. At this moment, Yosuji Masaki on the side greeted him. As for the interaction between the two people, they naturally saw it. At this moment, he understood why Kurosawa Hikaru was so anxious. It turned out that he was going to meet this girl, who was really beautiful and very elegant. Nice to meet you, I am Kurosawa Hikaru, please give me your advice. Kurosawa Hikaru turned around and walked over, extending his hand to say hello. I heard that you want to visit and learn. Sato Kyuden lowered his eyes and glanced at his outstretched hand, but did not shake hands with him, but said. In terms of seniority, this junior is not qualified to shake hands with him, and even has to bow and lower his head when he sees him. For a moment, the scene was a bit stiff. Because one party extended his hand, but the other party was unmoved. Yes. Sensing his arrogance, Kurosawa Hikaru was not embarrassed, and took back his hand and said. On the way after entering the door, he had already heard from Mr. Yosuji. The old man in front of him is a top 3 archery master in the Japanese archery world. Both his strength and fame are extraordinary. The style he is proficient in is the ritual shooting style, which is the mainstream of Japanese archery today. You are a student brought by my brother Yosuji. Today, I will make an exception and let you visit from the side. But if you want to come again in the future, I hope you come in by yourself, instead of relying on others to lead the way. Sato Kyuden did not drive him away, but his unwelcome attitude was very obvious and his tone was indifferent. Feeling his attitude, Kurosawa Hikaru's mind sank. Was it because of his interaction with Shifunjayuan Mirai just now that this old man had noticed him? He didn't do anything, just shook hands and said hello. According to this attitude, if he doesn't do something, he may not be able to touch the bow and arrow today, let alone complete the task. Do you have a chance to see how strong the top of the archery world is today? Kurosawa Hikaru asked after thinking about it. Do you want to see me take action? Sato Kyuden stood with his arms folded, very arrogant. Not just to see you take action, in fact, I came to the dojo this time to experience Sato Kyuden's power. Kurosawa Hikaru shook his head slightly, his eyes became sharp. How dare you say that? Can I understand this as a challenge? As soon as these words came out, Sato Kyuden's eyes suddenly became sharp, like the eyes of an eagle, with a certain momentum in his eyes. For a moment, the people who were shooting arrows next to them looked over. Looking across the country, there are only a handful of people who dare to compete with Sato Kyuden. Those who can compete with him are all big names who are famous all over the country. This young man really doesn't know his place. This is the challenge letter. Perhaps it was because he was on the road and was stared at by everyone, but Kurosawa Hikaru did not show any weakness. Since it is a competition, there will be winners and losers, and the loser should pay something, right? Seeing him confronting him, Sato Kyuden took a step forward and said in a deep voice. Yes, Kurosawa Hikaru nodded. If I win, you should stay away from the future. She is not worthy of an unknown person like you. After getting his affirmation, Sato Kyuden lowered his voice and said in a very light voice. It is not a good decision to use people as a bet. Kurosawa Hikaru was not very satisfied with this proposal. Betting, leaving the girl if you win, this kind of bet is too stupid. He used to think it was stupid whether he watched TV or anime. If that's the case, then you should kowtow to me in front of the future and apologize, saying that you are ignorant of the height of heaven and earth, arrogant and conceited, and never step into this dojo again. Sato Juden thought about it, and it was indeed not good to use the little apprentice as a bet, so he simply changed the punishment. Let this young man lose face in front of the future is also an option. If I win, I will come to the Zufeng dojo if I want to in the future, and you must treat me as a guest of honor. Kurosawa Mitsuru nodded, had no objection to this punishment, and also stated his own requirements. Only they knew the content of the punishment for the two, and no one else heard it. Go change into the hakama, and when you are ready, we will decide how to compete. After the matter was decided, Sato Juden said. Where is the locker room? Over there. Their actions and words were very decisive, and they did not give others a chance to interrupt. After asking for the direction, Kurosawa Mitsuru took a step and walked over with a shoulder bag on his back. As the two separated, Yosuji Masaka came to his senses and immediately followed. The two entered the dressing room together. After closing the door, Kurosawa Hikaru put down his bag and prepared to change clothes. Kurosawa, what's going on? Even if you have a good archery talent and can hit all 20 arrows, archery is not just about the hit rate, but also about the archery posture, character, attitude, and details. You can't compare with him at all. When Masaka Yosuji saw him changing clothes, he couldn't help but remind him. He was very clear about Kurosawa Hikaru's level, after all, he had tested it before. This young man's talent can be described as terrifying. Although he doesn't know much about archery, he is a master in standing posture, mentality, eyesight, and accuracy. It is no exaggeration to say that as long as Kurosawa Hikaru concentrates on practicing for a few years and polishes the basics, he can enter the professional field at any time, and even make a big name in the future. Teacher Yosuji, there are 3 things a man must defend to the death. Take out the clothes and put them aside. Kurosawa Hikaru glanced at him and said while unbuttoning his shirt. What 3 things? Seeing his serious face, Masaka Yosuji was a little curious. Life, dignity, and face in front of the girl I like. Kurosawa Hikaru took off his shirt, and the muscles of his upper body were tense because of the action, which made him look very powerful. Indeed, Yosuji Masaka thought about it and nodded in agreement, thinking it made sense. These things are indeed worth fighting for with all your strength. But even so, defending to the death and sending yourself to die are not the same thing. You have no chance of winning in a competition with Sato Juden. But in the next moment, Yosuji Masaki reacted, shook his head frantically, and said hurriedly. Outsiders may not understand how strong Sato Juden is, but he knows it very well. Even if he spends his whole life, he may not be able to reach the height of Sato Juden. You know, Kyudo in Japan is divided into 2 systems, grades and ranks, and there are titles above the ranks. Beginners gradually advance in grades, seniors are called rankers, and teachers must have the titles of trainer, priest, and fanshi. If you want to advance in the rank, the higher you go, the harder it is. 8th Dan is already a legendary figure. 9th Dan is the person who stands at the top of Kyudo. As for the 10th Dan above that, they are even rarer, and there are very few in history. Although Sato 9th Dan is old, now 70 years old, and his competitive state is no longer young, he is still old and his level is exaggerated, beyond imagination. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 104. We haven't competed yet, so don't break my morale. Since they were both men, Kurosawa Hikaru didn't mind changing clothes in front of him. He had worn a hakama once before in the Kyudo club. Although it was a rather special style, it was not difficult to put on. The difficulty of hakama clothing lies in the belt. The tying method is very particular and quite complicated, just like a kimono. It's not that I want to hurt you, it was your first time to come to the Kyudo club, and you didn't even know the 8 sections of shooting. Although you have a strong learning ability, you have to challenge the master in just a few days. Seeing that he kept changing clothes, Masaka Yosuji really had a headache. To be honest, When he first received the call from Kurosawa Hikaru, he was very happy. I was even more overjoyed to learn that he wanted to visit the Fengzui dojo, because this young man was definitely a talent that could be made. If he could be tempered by Sato Ninth Dan, he would definitely become a great talent. But I never thought that this guy didn't come to learn skills from a master at all, but to pick up girls, and he didn't know the rules and directly challenged the master. Teacher Yosuji, please help me call Miss Shifunjin in, the girl I shook hands with just now. Soon, Kurosawa Hikaru was dressed, but the belt was not yet tied. Fine. Seeing that he couldn't hear what others were saying, Masaka Yosuji thought of the arrogance of genius, stopped forcing him, and nodded. Forget it, just use this competition to let Sato Ninth Dan defeat his spirit. Maybe, this competition can stimulate his competitive spirit, and starting from next week, he will take the initiative to come to the club to train, instead of just coming to the club once and then disappearing like before. As he walked out, after a while, Saifunjai Yuan Mirai opened the door of the locker room and took a peek. Kurosawa, why do you think of competing with the teacher? After seeing Kurosawa Hikaru getting dressed without any embarrassment, Shifunjin Mirai asked anxiously. Just now she heard Hikaru Kurosawa issuing a challenge, and was stunned on the spot. When she came to her senses, Kurosawa had already made an appointment with the teacher to compete and entered the locker room. Since the maid was nearby, she didn't have the chance to say anything. Now that she was alone in the dressing room, she had a chance. Because I want to shoot archery with you, and he won't let me touch the bow without challenging him. Kurosawa Hikaru, who was still adjusting his collar, responded. Why did you call me in? Hearing that he wanted to shoot archery with her, Saifunjai Yuan Mirai's anger and incomprehension were immediately washed away. He stopped talking a few times and simply asked. I don't know how to tie a belt, can you help me? Kurosawa held the hakama to prevent it from falling, pointed to the belt on the bench, and blinked. You don't even know how to tie a Kyoto uniform belt, so you still dare to challenge the teacher. Sifengyuan was stunned for a moment in the future, and then blamed him. Although she was complaining, she still stepped forward and picked up the belt on the chair. In any case, Kurosawa Hikaru had gone to a lot of trouble to enter the dojo to see her. It was just a trivial matter to help tie the belt. Shifunjai Yuan Mirai is about 1.7 meters tall. He is very tall. He wears hakama clothes, which makes him look even taller. You look more energetic in your hakama clothes than usual. As she walked up to him and helped tie the belt, Kurosawa opened his arms, looked down at her and smiled. You're pretty much the same, not too serious. Mirai Shifunjin, who was circling around him with his head lowered and helping to tie his belt, was a little embarrassed when he heard this and responded without raising his head. This guy has never been serious since he suddenly asked her to rest. Ha ha ha. Kurosawa Hikaru didn't feel disgusted when he heard this comment. When getting along with girls, it's not good to be too serious. Both men and women like interesting people, but being too honest will make them boring. By the way, what were you whispering to the teacher just now? Continuing to help tie the belt, Saifunjai Yuan was a little curious in the future. He said competitions are interesting only when there are bets. Bet? What is the teacher's request? If he wins, I will stay away from you in the future and will never be allowed to step into this dojo. He said that a nobody like me is not worthy of you. Kurosawa Hikaru thought for a while and said as he said. Ah, you're trying too hard, please be gentle. As soon as he finished speaking, Kurosawa Hikaru suddenly felt a tightness in his waist and hurriedly stopped him. Forget it, you bastard. Shifunjai Yuan Mirai was a little angry. He raised his head and glared at Kurosawa Hikaru with his ruby-like eyes. He actually used her as a bet. What kind of thing is this? Because she is very beautiful, her angry expression and bulging look are not only not scary, but actually a bit cute. Don't be so quick to get angry. I haven't finished speaking yet. I didn't agree to his request. However, Kurosawa Hikaru didn't have time to appreciate how cute she was, so he quickly added, "Not this bet." Hearing this, Sifenjayuan Mirai immediately took back his strength. "Of course not, how could I use you as a bet? What bet was exchanged for?" Realizing that he had not agreed to his request to stay away from her, Sifenuen felt a little more at ease in the future and asked again. "If I lose, I will kowtow to him and admit my mistake, and I will not be allowed to enter this dojo in the future." "That's okay." After learning about this request, Sifenjayuan thought about it in the future and said with relief. "Is this okay?" Kurosawa Hikaru was a little surprised. This condition was similar to before. "Anyway, you challenged the teacher this time and offended the teacher. It will be impossible for you to enter the dojo again. It's a bit embarrassing to kowtow and apologize." Sifenuen nodded in the future. Explained. Hey, do you think I'm going to lose? Can you still win?" Sifenjayuan Mirai raised his head and looked at him, staring into his eyes with a pair of red eyes. "What if I win?" "No ifs." "What if?" "If I win, is there any reward?" "If you win, I can grant you a request, anything," Sifenjayuan said after hesitating for 2 seconds in the future. "Any request is fine." Upon hearing this, Kurosawa's eyes suddenly became sharp. In his previous life, he had seen the experiences of love masters. It is said that a girl takes the initiative to agree to a boy's request, and anything is acceptable, which means that the girl's heart is ready to stir up, eager for the boy to have something happen with her through the request of punishment. Within my ability, I can't go too far. Seeing that something was wrong in his eyes, Sifenjayuan Mirai immediately felt guilty and added, "Then can you kiss me here then?" Although he knew such a joke, Kurosawa Hikaru thought about it and pointed to his cheek, very close to the corner of his mouth. "You think so?" "It's fastened." Sifenjayuan saw his actions in the future and thought he meant kiss. He couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed, but finally got it done. The reason why she has never tied someone's belt for so long, being a handmaid, is one thing, but the fundamental reason is that she has something to say. Goal progress update: let her help you tie your hakama belt has been achieved. At the same time, a line of words appeared in front of Kurosawa Hikaru's eyes. Wait for my triumphant return. Having accomplished this goal, Kurosawa Hikaru was much relieved. He stepped forward and waved his hand, as if he was going to the battlefield. Next, as long as he performs brilliantly enough, shoots Sifenjayuan's future heart with an arrow, impressing her, and completes the task in the competition, he can upgrade the proficient level archery to the perfect level. By then, let alone 9th Dan, even 10th Dan, he would have the confidence to fight. Wait a minute, you haven't put on your food bag yet. Seeing him taking big steps and looking like a strong man moving forward, Sifenjayuan Mirai suddenly saw him wearing a pair of black socks and said quickly, "Oh yes." After being reminded by this, Kurosawa Hikaru had no choice but to stop his campaign and turn around to go back. As for Shushu, I woke up very early today and delivered it early so that everyone can see it when they wake up. Also, the previous group was bombed, probably because of an insider, and was maliciously manipulated. Kk, I cried to death, and my good mood fell to the bottom. The new group can be found in the introduction and below on the novel homepage. You can add the group with one click. Please add it. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 105. The two people didn't stay in the locker room for long before they walked out one after another. Kurosawa Hikaru, who was wearing hakama, looked like a noble prince with an extraordinary temperament because of his handsome appearance and tall figure. I'm ready to go. Kurosawa Hikaru returned to the dojo and looked at Sato Kyuden, who was wearing a kimono, with a very polite tone. After all, he was brought here, and the challenge just now was already very rude, and he couldn't let the relationship deteriorate further. There are many rules in the Kyudojo. For example, high-ranking Kyudo masters no longer wear hakama clothes, but kimonos to show their identity and status. If you want to wear a kimono in the dojo, you can't just wear it casually. It must be a special period, or you must be in the 4th level of Kyudo or above. He didn't carry a bow with him. In the future, go take him to choose a bow. Sato Kyuden didn't care about his attitude. He glanced at the two of them and saw that their clothes were neat and their faces were calm. It didn't look like something had happened, so he said calmly. In the neon bow path, the length of the bow is almost exactly the same, about 221 centimeters. It can be said that the bow is taller than a person, which is very conspicuous. How much bow power do you need? Saifanjayuan Mirai nodded after hearing the teacher's words and asked. About 25 kilograms. Kurosawa Hikaru had experienced it before at Todai Kyudo Club, so he had a certain understanding of it. The so-called bow power refers to how heavy a bow can be pulled. So heavy. Saifanjayuan is a little surprised in the future. Normally, the bow power of young boys fluctuates around 15 kilograms. 25 kilograms is already far beyond the average. If it's too light, it won't be easy to use. Kurosawa Hikaru nodded, sure of this. The skill rewarded by the system is archery proficiency, not archery proficiency, so he doesn't understand many rules of neon archery. However, his proficiency in level archery allows him to easily master a bow, and also gives him strong arm strength. Is it really okay? 25 kilograms is very heavy. Saifanjayuan glanced at his figure in the future and couldn't help but feel worried. No matter how you look at it, Kurosawa Hikaru doesn't look like a strong man. Bring me my bow. Sato Kyuden did not comment on his choice, but turned to look at a middle-aged man and gave instructions. Yes. That was his apprentice. Hearing this, his spirits perked up and he even ran away to get his bow. It is a very rare thing to be able to see a teacher shooting archery. After a while, the apprentice ran over with a bow and handed them to the teacher. Sato Kyuden said nothing, just stretched out his hand and held the bow. The moment he grasped the bow, he, who was already calm and intimidating, became even more majestic, looking like a master of archery. Just standing there gave people an incredible feeling. For you. At the same time, Shifunjayuan sent a bow and 2 arrows to Kurosawa Hikaru in the future. Beside her, there was Masaki Yosuji, who had just gone to help. Thank you. Kurosawa Hikaru smiled slightly, stretched out his hand, and took the bow in his hand. The moment he held the bow, he only felt a wave of waves spreading from his palm to his whole body. In an instant, he seemed to have entered another state. This 2-meter-long bow seemed to have transformed into his arm, so familiar that he could no longer be familiar with it. He had experienced this feeling before in the Dongda Kyudo Club. The proficiency level archery is very terrifying, as if something in his body has awakened. That was talent, a terrifying talent, as if he was born with it and was suitable for archery. At this moment, Saifanjayuan Mirai, who was standing in front of him, was suddenly startled, his delicate body trembled, and he took 2 steps back. As the distance grew further, she discovered that after Kurosawa Hikaru held the bow, the abnormal feeling completely disappeared, replaced by a suffocating and frightening sense of oppression. Looking into his eyes, it was as if you were peering into the eyes of a falcon. If you were discovered, you would feel extremely dangerous and look very fierce. Sato Kyuden on the side could only see his back but not his front. Even so, he still felt keenly that Kurosawa Hikaru seemed to be a different person after holding the bow. That back looks like that of a professional archer. He is definitely very good at archery. I am Sato Shinichi, what is your name? Realizing that this young man was not simple, Sato Kyuden put away his contemptuous thoughts and spoke. Originally, he was too lazy to remember this young man's name, so he just took this opportunity to teach him a lesson and drive him away, but this gesture was worth remembering. Kurosawa Hikaru. Kurosawa Hikaru turned around and looked at him. The distance between the two sides is about 3 meters. But their eyes met, and their sharp gazes collided. It's interesting. How are you going to compete? Seeing his sharp eyes, but his calm face, Sato Shinichi asked. Anything else is fine, but I want you to shoot the arrow first. Kurosawa Hikaru didn't know much about neon archery, so he simply said. Since your bow power is so strong, let's compete at a distance. The shooting range is 60 meters, the target is 79 centimeters, and one arrow enters the soul system. Yosuji 6th Dan will be the examiner. Sato Shinichi was not polite and decided on the rules after thinking about it. Okay. Come with me, to the long-range shooting range. After the matter was settled, Sato Shinichi walked with a bow in hand, leading the way to another competition venue. Seeing this, Kurosawa Mitsuru naturally followed. When the others saw this, they all put down their bows and followed. After passing through the wooden corridor, they soon arrived at another shooting range. Compared to the previous shooting range, this shooting range is longer, larger and wider, but the interior decoration is similar. On the wall, there are 2 calligraphy paintings. These 2 paragraphs are a shooting method training and Book of Rites shooting meaning, both of which are the basic ideas of Kyudo. Let's get started. As he stepped into the dojo, Yosuji Masaka said. Hearing this, Sato Shinichi, who was already white-haired, walked with a bow in his hand. As for Kurosawa Mitsuru, he also followed his movements completely. It was easy to learn if someone imitated him. The 2 people walked very slowly, because the mainstream of Neon Kyudo is literary shooting, which is a competition that does not focus on killing, but attaches great importance to etiquette and ritual. With the development and evolution of the times, due to its characteristics of self-cultivation, solemnity, and elegance, it has become a trend of aristocratic sports in recent years. Walking, they came to an open space, knelt down sideways, saluted first, then stood up, walked a few steps, and knelt again. Then, Sato Shinichi exchanged the bow in his left hand to his right hand, and began to move his left hand, bending his arm from the cuffs, taking off his half sleeves, revealing half of his chest and left arm. Because of his advanced age, his skin has been a little loose, but he is still very muscular. In contrast, Kurosawa Hikaru took off his half sleeves and exposed his left shoulder. His skin is white and radiant, his muscle lines are excellent, and his chest muscles are upright. After all, it is the body of a young man. Beautiful. Seeing this scene, Yosuji Masaka couldn't help but say. This Kurosawa Hikaru, when he first came to the Kyudo club a few days ago, he didn't know anything. But now, his movements are so standard, not much worse than Sato Juden. Indeed. Shifunjayuan Mirai glanced at Kurosawa Hikaru's left shoulder, and her eyes were a little attracted. Seeing people showing half of their shoulders, she was used to it because she had been in the archery dojo since she was a child, and she had also seen college archery players from all the schools come to the dojo. But she never cared about those people, but the sight of Kurosawa Hikaru taking off half of his clothes and showing his shoulders was really blushing and heart-pounding. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 106. The so-called 8 steps of archery refer to the 8 standard steps of archery. That is, stepping, framing, loading the arrow, lifting, pulling apart, concentrating, separating, and remnant. After taking off his short sleeves, Sato Shinichi once again held the bow with his left arm, stood up, and stepped to the shooting point. He moved on the spot, framing his body, looking straight ahead, lowering his head to load the arrow, raising the bow over his head, and pulling the string to full draw. As he began to move, everyone present was paying attention. This was a rare opportunity, and he had to see every detail clearly. Even for Shifunjayuan Mirai, there were not many times he could see his master shooting arrows. What a strong concentration! Seeing this scene, Yosuji Masaki, as a sixth dan in archery, was awed and held his breath. When watching archery, you cannot easily make a sound, so as not to affect the concentration of the players. No matter what field it is a pyramid-like echelon. The higher you go, the narrower the road ahead. As one of the top players in Nihon Kyoto, Sato Ninth Dan has been immersed in Kyoto all his life, and has put in countless efforts. He is also very talented. In the state of full concentration, Sato Shinichi concentrated on pulling the bow, and his arm was shaking slightly. This is not due to old age, but a very normal thing. This is related to muscle control, which is a conditioned reflex under high muscle tension. In fact, the arrow is shot out, not flying, but swimming like a fish. Under the strong thrust of the bowstring, the texture of the arrow is usually very flexible, and it will fly far away while swimming continuously. To curb this situation and move forward completely straight, unless the texture of the arrow is hard and heavy enough. Snap! Finally, Sato Shinichi let go, the arrow and the bow separated, and the bowstring made a pleasant and crisp sound. The arrow broke through the wind and hit the target 60 meters away directly, with extremely high accuracy. Hit, in a ring. Yosuji 6th Dan looked from a distance and said the result with a smack of his mouth. Sato's level is still sharp. The rule of this competition is one arrow hits the target, that is, each person shoots an arrow each time. If the arrow hits the target, they can continue to shoot the next arrow until there is only one person left. Because there are only two people in this competition, as long as the arrow hits the target once, it means failure. As the result was announced, Sato Shinichi paused in the state of bow return, and then slowly stood up, and the resentment ended. He did not look at Kurosawa Mitsuru, because this is the state of competition, and he cannot be distracted. So strong. That's the master, isn't this a matter of course? The apprentice on the side saw the scene and couldn't help but marvel. The arrow just now was so beautiful, whether it was the state of concentration, accuracy, or shooting type, it was impeccable. Huh. At the same time, Kurosawa Mitsuru was adjusting his breathing. After a few breaths, he was no longer kneeling, but stood up. It's still so close, and the target is so big. Stepping forward, adjusting his position, and constructing his body shape, Kurosawa Mitsuru raised his head and looked at the target 60 meters away, thinking. He found that after he held the bow, his vision became terrible. Even though it was 60 meters away, the target that was nearly 1 meter in size was clearly visible, as if it was close at hand. With this thought in mind, Kurosawa Mitsuru lowered his head slightly, loaded the arrow, and drew the bow to its full length. The people standing next to him were all a little surprised to see his archery posture. What a beautiful shooting form! Shifunjayuan Mirai looked at his archery posture from the side, and her ruby-like beautiful eyes widened. When they agreed to meet on the weekend, she originally thought that Kurosawa Mitsuru said that he thought he was proficient in archery, and he simply wanted to use this as an excuse to get to know her and have more contact. In fact, he was just a rookie who was bragging. But she didn't care too much at the time. After all, the level of archery was not high, not to mention that she was looking forward to having her first friend of the opposite sex. But now it seems that Kurosawa Hikaru didn't say that just to get close to her. He is really proficient in archery, not just bragging. Snap! Aiming, shooting, Kurosawa Hikaru released the arrow in his right hand. The sound of the string was crisp and powerful, as if it was an echo that broke through everything, shaking the soul, and it was more pleasant than Sato Kyuden. Duh. Although the distance was far, because it was in the courtyard, the huge force of hitting the target actually echoed. Hit, the bullseye. Realizing that his arm strength was terrible, Yosuji Masaka looked at it carefully and was surprised. When he was in the school club before, Kurosawa Hikaru clearly didn't know Kyoto, but he showed an unparalleled talent in archery. All 20 arrows hit the target, and every arrow hit the target, which was terrifying, but that was a close target of 28 meters after all. Now it is a 60-meter target, and it is the first arrow, in an unfamiliar venue, but it hits the bullseye directly. This accuracy is too terrifying. At the same time, a few lines of words appeared in front of Kurosawa Hikaru's eyes. Mission goal: shoot her heart with an arrow has been achieved. Mission goal: make her look at you with new eyes has been achieved. First date with Shifunjayuan in the future: 4 mission goals have been achieved. Mission completed. Rewards: entry-level archery, entry-level piano, permanent. Because the host already has the archery reward, the mastery level archery is upgraded to the perfect level. Because the host already has the piano reward, the entry-level piano is upgraded to the mastery level. With the appearance of these words, countless knowledge and experience emerged in Kurosawa Hikaru's mind. Is the mission completed? Absorbing the gains brought by the permanent reward, Kurosawa Hikaru slowly retracted his bow and couldn't help but look back at Shifunjayuan Mirai. Shifunjayuan Mirai, who was staring at him intently, noticed his gaze, recovered, was suddenly startled, and looked away in a panic. How can he be so good at archery? Didn't he say that he would go back to his hometown to play occasionally? Big liar. Shifunjayuan Mirai lowered his head, his face was a little hot and red, and his heartbeat was accelerating. The arrow just now was too handsome, like an arrow shot into her heart. Could it be that Kurosawa Hikaru really has the possibility of defeating the master? If so, wouldn't she really have to kiss Kurosawa Hikaru? That was her first kiss. Sure enough, Mr. Kurosawa is very powerful. Akai Sayaka, who was standing aside, saw this scene, but was not surprised at all, and said secretly. When she saw Mr. Kurosawa before, she felt that he might have encountered something good. Whether it was his standing posture or walking posture, even his back was straight, and there was a sense of confidence radiating from the inside out. This kind of temperament is not easy to appear, but with something to rely on, he can face all situations calmly. So accurate, at the same time, even if Sato Shinichi didn't want to be distracted by other players, he was also shocked by this arrow. It's not so easy to hit the bullseye at a target 60 meters away. I haven't heard of his name before. Where did this guy come from? With just this arrow, Sato Shinichi has fully realized that he might not be able to teach this young man a lesson so easily. If this arrow is not a flash in the pan, but has such a level, in terms of archery alone, it can even compete with his prime. There are 3 days left before the listing. It will definitely be listed on November 1st. There will be more updates after the listing. Please support us handsome guys and beautiful girls at that time. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 107. Due to the rules of the game, both of them hit the target and entered the next round. Kyoto is not competitive. They don't compete on the number of rings, but on the target. As long as the target is hit, whether it is shot at the outer ring or the center of the bullseye, the result of the game is the same. In Japanese Kyoto, 2 arrows are usually carried in hand. We must go all out. Sato Shinichi took a deep breath and his eyes became determined. He stepped on the footsteps again, adjusted his body shape, loaded the arrow, raised the bow over his head, fully opened, concentrated, and shot another arrow. Snap, the bowstring made a sound. Hit the target, inner ring. Then, Yosuji Masaki announced the result. Sato Shinichi was a little sorry for not being able to hit the center of the bullseye, but he didn't show it. Instead, he turned his head slightly and looked at Kurosawa Hikaru. In Japanese Kyudo, you must honestly accept the results of each arrow, whether good or bad, and face it squarely. At the same time, Kurosawa Hikaru straightened his body and began to load the arrow. As the arrow in his right hand rested on the bowstring, he raised the bow over his head and slowly pulled the string down. Ka-ka. As the arrow was fully opened, the arrow, which was as long as his arm, was parallel to his arm. The muscles on his half-opened left shoulder actually bulged in a circle. The muscle lines gave people a terrible sense of power, and the bow was further pulled to the limit, making a sound. Boom. Everyone who noticed this and looked at him seemed to have something exploded in front of them, causing their hearts to vibrate. Unlike just now, the posture of raising the bow and pulling the arrow exuded a suffocating sense of oppression. This is a feeling that only archery players can feel, like a strong wind blowing on their faces. That shooting shape, that archery posture, is natural, and it is the pinnacle, perfect to the point of impeccable. It seems that the archery posture should be like this, beautiful like a painting, like a poem. Body, mind, bow, and arrow, completely integrated. Everyone looked at this arrow, as if their hearts were attracted by it. Snap. The next moment, the bowstring exploded and the arrow was shot out. This arrow was like an arrow that broke through the raging wind, with great courage and extraordinary impact. Dong. Then, the sound of hitting the target echoed again in the archery field, and the sound was even louder. This time, there was no need to announce it, everyone saw the result. Hit the target, the bullseye. What's more terrifying is that this arrow directly penetrated the previous arrow and completely penetrated the bullseye, leaving a hole. Everyone looked at Kurosawa Mitsuru's powerful figure again. His expression did not change. He was still calm and composed, in a state of resentment, as if the result of this arrow was a matter of course. If his first arrow showed accuracy and made people feel that it was luck, then this arrow was a bow skill that crushed everything and was extremely shocking. Everyone felt it very directly, whether it was 1 arrow, 2 arrows, 10 arrows, or 100 arrows, the result would be the same. As long as he had a bow and arrow in his hand, he could hit the bullseye, without exception. After holding the bow, from the aspects of shooting style, attitude, character, technology, etc., this man's archery level is so high that it is even impossible to evaluate. Under the spotlight, Kurosawa Mitsuru slowly put down the bow and stood holding the bow. No arrows left, can anyone help me get a few more? Kurosawa Mitsuru let out a long breath and turned around to ask. Hearing this question, everyone came back to their senses. I'll get it for you. A disciple of Sato Ninth Dan said subconsciously. The subconscious honorific and attitude have already shown everything. Kurosawa Mitsuru's 2 arrows just now completely convinced him. As an archer, he has a desire in his heart, that is, he wants to see more. I'll go, I know the length of the arrow. Yosuji Masaki is the same. He is more excited than anyone else and ran directly. Seeing this scene, Sato Shinichi turned his head and looked at the other people present. Unlike just now, it was only 2 arrows, and everyone looked at Kurosawa Mitsuru with more admiration. The archery skills that crushed the whole field and looked down on everything impressed everyone. Sato Shinichi was silent. He held the bow tightly, and his right hand without the arrow clenched tightly. He already felt that he might lose this game. As Sato Juden, he was a very important figure in Japan, and he dedicated his life to archery. It's not that he had never lost before, because there was a 10th Dan archery above him, but he never dreamed that he would lose to a young man. He didn't see what the first arrow looked like, but he saw the second arrow very clearly. This young man's archery skills are probably unmatched in the new generation. He has overwhelming talent, not only that, he should have paid a lot of hard work and sweat. This man's strength is enough to become the strongest archery master in the Reiwa era, standing above everyone's head. Realizing this, his mood was very complicated, a sense of powerlessness spread from his body, but also a feeling of relief. The weak thing is that when he thinks back to his heyday, he would probably lose to this young man because the gap in talent is irreparable. Fortunately, this man will become the leader of Japanese Kyoto in the future, win glory for the country, and even promote Kyoto to more people. At this moment, Yosuji Masaka sent 2 arrows to Kurosawa Hikaru. Arrows. Seeing this, Sato Shinichi came back to his senses and stretched out his hand and said in a deep voice. Even though he saw the result, he still wanted to compete. He wanted to see more, how strong this young man could be. Yes. Hearing this, his apprentice hurried to get the arrows. Although they had a feeling of admiration for Kurosawa Hikaru, they still respected their master. Then, they continued to compete with the rule of 1 arrow into the soul. As a 9th Dan of Kyoto, Sato Shinichi's strength is unquestionable. Even though he is old, his accuracy is still terrible. Maybe he couldn't hit the bull's eye with every arrow, but after 10 arrows, none of them missed the target, and even 1 arrow hit the bull's eye. However, no one cared about his result. Because every arrow of Kurosawa Hikaru hit the bull's eye without suspense, and what made people immersed in it was the perfection of his archery posture. Each arrow was very powerful, as if it was an art. All 10 arrows hit the bull's eye, without exception, as if the god of archery had descended before them. The 2 men did not speak, and raised their bows and shot arrows. Until the 14th arrow, Sato Juden finally missed, and 1 arrow missed the target. He shot arrows continuously, but because of his old age and weakness, he had no strength. Dong. Kurosawa Hikaru shot another arrow, hitting the bullseye, ending the game. Sato Shinichi, who was exhausted, saw that he still looked relaxed, and inspected the dojo again, looking at his disciples. I lost, Mr. Kurosawa. After a pause, Sato Shinichi stood with a bow in his hand, bowed to Kurosawa Hikaru, and treated him as a guest of honor. Outstanding ability can make up for many things, including the rudeness at the beginning. Fully aware of his strength, Sato Shinichi no longer hated him, but looked at him with new eyes. Thank you, Sato Kyuden. Although he won, Kurosawa Hikaru was not arrogant, but bowed to him. Because he had perfect archery skills, he already knew that his current archery level was close to that of the spring and autumn period's top archer, Yang Yuji. That's why he knew very well that Sato Kyuden's strength was extraordinary. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 108. You respect me, I respect you, and we can communicate harmoniously. Everyone, welcome Mr. Kurosawa to the Chasing Wind Dojo. Sato Shinichi was convinced of his defeat. After bowing, he saw that he did not hold grudges, so he also greeted him. Welcome Mr. Kurosawa to the Chasing Wind Dojo. As soon as this was said, everyone bowed and saluted, saying in unison. Kurosawa Hikaru's archery just now really taught everyone present a lesson. That was another high level of archery skills, and the gap between them seemed to be separated by a different dimension. The gains brought by the performance of the 14 arrows, even if they could understand one point of it, would be enough to take their archery skills to a higher level. Mirai, why don't you welcome Mr. Kurosawa? Sato Shinichi looked around and saw that Shifunjayuan Mirai did not respond, so he taught him a lesson with a stern face. Welcome Mr. Kurosawa to the Chasing Wind Dojo. Shifunjayuan Mirai heard this order, came back to his senses, hesitated for 2 seconds, and bowed his head. Kurosawa Hikaru's performance just now impressed everyone, including her. She has been practicing Kyoto since she was a child and loves Kyoto very much, so she admires Kurosawa Hikaru's Kyoto so much. Mr. Kurosawa, why don't you sit down and talk? Sato Shinichi handed the bow to his apprentice beside him, and walked forward to invite him to let bygones be bygones. He really wanted to know how this young man could be so young and have such superb archery skills. No need, I'm sure you know the purpose of my trip to the Zufeng dojo. Just don't worry about what I do with Shifunjayuan in the future. Kurosawa Hikaru shook his head and whispered. For the future? Excuse me, what is your family background? Sato Shinichi heard this and realized something, and asked immediately. My family background is quite ordinary. Kurosawa Hikaru didn't know why he was like this, but felt that he had no ill intentions, so he responded. If that's the case, you have to work harder. Why? I'm an old friend of her grandfather. This child is not an only child. She has an older brother, so her grandfather plans to let her marry to further expand the family's influence. Although you are a student of the University of Tokyo, it is difficult to marry her unless you have a strong background or are powerful. Sato Shinichi glanced at Shifunjayuan Mirai, who was a few meters away, and told the unknown truth. There is also this matter, does she know about this? Kurosawa Hikaru was shocked and a little surprised, and also glanced at Shifunjayuan Mirai. According to this statement, she will become a victim of marriage in the future. You must receive various educations when you are young, be monitored and restrained, and you will have to marry when you become an adult. Although Shifunjayuan Mirai was born with a golden spoon in her mouth, she has no worries about food and clothing, and her family is rich. It is undoubtedly a tragedy that she does not even have the right to marry autonomously. You should know that although she hasn't found a fiancé yet, it's only a matter of time. This is her destiny. If you want to be with her, you need fame and respect. You can't be an unknown person like now. You must become famous. Sato Shinichi actually cares about this matter, but he can't do anything about it. Is it because of this that you said I was not worthy of her at the beginning? This kid in the future cares about you very much. This morning, she was so anxious waiting for you that she missed the target one after another, so I don't like you very much. And even if the maid won't stop you from becoming friends, she won't sit idly by if you go any further. Instead of waiting for your relationship to get better and be separated abruptly in the end, I might as well cut off the relationship between the two of you now so that it won't become a regret for her life. But Kyudo is one of the mainstream martial arts in Japan, and Kyudo masters have a high status. If you can defeat Ogasawara Juden, open a dojo, and recruit disciples, the Shifunjayuan family will definitely not stop you from being together. Sato Shinichi was even a little excited when he said this. He seemed to have seen the rise of another archery legend. After talking to him, Kurosawa Hikaru didn't say anything more, just walked aside. Kurosawa, your talent is too exaggerated, it's only been a few days. Yosuji Masaka was very excited, and greeted him when he came over. Originally, he was thinking of using a day in the summer vacation to give Kurosawa Hikaru a good guide, so that he could participate in the archery competition and get a good ranking. But now it seems that Kurosawa Hikaru doesn't need to accept guidance at all. Sato Juden is not his opponent, and the same is true for universities across the country. There is no doubt that Kurosawa Hikaru can definitely win glory for the school, and even a game can directly make the name of the Tokyo University Archery Club famous. Teacher Yosuji, I'm sorry, I'm a little tired, please let me rest for a while. Faced with his excitement, Kurosawa Hikaru won the game, but he couldn't be happy, and his mood was a little subtle and complicated. Okay, I'll help you put the bow up. Yosujida Hikaru saw that he was in a bad mood, and was a little confused as to why he was not happy after winning, but he was not in a hurry, so he said immediately. When Kurosawa Hikaru saw him reach out his hand and handed the bow to him, he did not immediately go to find Shifunjayuan Mirai, but sat down by the wall. There are no chairs in the archery dojo, not under normal circumstances. The task was completed and the reward was obtained, but he really couldn't be happy, and he even dared not face Shifunjayuan Mirai. Destiny and regret. Thinking of what he said just now, he looked up at Shifunjayuan Mirai and was a little concerned. Becoming a so-called archery master and becoming famous. Kurosawa Hikaru had no idea in this regard. Even if he had perfect archery skills, he didn't think about opening a dojo and recruiting disciples. Although he liked the feeling of archery because he experienced new things through the system's rewards, it didn't mean that he loved archery. Because he always hit the target, he felt bored when he shot the 14th arrow. As long as he had a bow and arrow in his hand, he could shoot wherever he wanted. Let's not talk about this for now. Compared with this, the reason why he was not in a good mood was because he hadn't thought about getting married yet. Today he came to the Zufeng dojo, but the other party expected a date. He happily went to the date and created beautiful and precious memories with the other party. The result was different from the previous date, which ended successfully. The burden of reality was placed in front of him. If he didn't marry her, Shifunji Yuan Mirai would probably follow fate in a few years and marry someone she didn't know or know. If my relationship with her gets better, not being able to be with her in the future may become a lifelong regret. But if I marry her, what about Xiaoyuki and Miss Ninomiya? Mr. Kurosawa, why do you still look unhappy after winning the teacher? At this moment, Shifunji Yuan Mirai walked to his side and asked with his hands behind his back and slightly bent over. She had a high ponytail and wore a hakama. Unlike the dullness in the tutoring class, her lively tone made her already beautiful face look dignified and elegant, like a lady from a noble family. In fact, she hesitated for a long time, but still came over. After all, according to the agreement, she had to kiss Kurosawa Hikaru. As an adolescent girl, she was naturally shy. But Kurosawa Hikaru looked like he was worried. I don't know what happened. Out of concern, he still mustered up the courage to come over. Kurosawa Hikaru looked up at her, opened his mouth, and couldn't say a word. If Sato Kyuden hadn't said what he said just now, he would definitely say something like, I'm thinking about how you can kiss me, it's a headache, but now he is in a state of hesitation. The countdown to the listing is 2 days. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 109. Saifunji Yuan found in the future that he was hesitant to speak and seemed to be worried. His originally excited thoughts suddenly sank to the bottom. As a rich young lady, she has been favored by many stars on various occasions since she was a child, which makes her very observant. Did the teacher tell you something? Sifeng Yuan turned around in the future, sat down next to him, and whispered. About your grandfather. Kurosawa thought for a while and nodded. He is not a person with overflowing sympathy. Just like when he tutored Saifunji Yuan in the future for more than a year, he turned a blind eye to her affairs and simply taught her to study. But after being dumped by his ex-girlfriend and getting the system, his thoughts began to change. He no longer lived indifferently for the sake of living, but truly lived, and he began to notice the people around him. But what Sato Kyuden said just now reminded him of one thing, and that was the result. As the saying goes, if you don't marry, why flirt? He has already provoked Xiaoyuki and Miss Ninomiya. If he provokes Mirai Shifunjin again, how will it end? Ah, it seems that the teacher really appreciates you. Realizing that he really knew about this, Sifeng Yuan raised his head in the future, looked at the ceiling of the dojo, the smile on his face gradually faded, and he sighed. Not many people actually know about my grandfather. At least in the dojo, many fellow apprentices don't know about this. Only a few people from wealthy families know about it and have heard some rumors. After all, at her 16th birthday party in her freshman year of high school, the moment she reached the legal age, her grandfather announced at the party that he would help her find a well-matched husband. There were many people present at the party. There were many guests at that birthday party, including dignitaries, capitalists, consortiums, and emerging entrepreneurs. These people all had one thing in common: which was that they had strong family backgrounds and huge potential. What do you think about this matter? Kurosawa Hikaru didn't want to poke scars, but he couldn't help but ask. Do you know? This archery dojo is the only place where I can rest. Mirai Saifunjayuan looked at the huge archery dojo and said suddenly. Felt it? Naturally, Kurosawa Hikaru didn't know about this, but he was aware of it. Unlike in that high-end apartment, she looked more energetic here. Maybe it was because of the Kyoto Hakama suit, but she gave people a different feeling. Because the teacher loves me so much, even though Kyoto training is very hard, it feels very comfortable to put aside distracting thoughts and worries, and it is also very satisfying when I hit the target. The most important thing is that wearing Hakama clothes makes me feel comfortable. I feel like a different person. It's not Miss Saifunjayuan, but a disciple of Zui Feng Dojo. Kurosawa Hikaru saw her changing the subject and followed her lead. Almost, more specifically, I feel like I've become an archer. Is this so? Kurosawa Hikari seemed to have some realization. Changing an identity and changing a face is like changing a life. You know what I'm thinking every time I hit the bullseye? Because the most important secret was known, and because he was special, Saifunjayuan Mirai couldn't help but reveal his true feelings. What are you thinking about? If it were on an ancient battlefield, my archery skills might be able to kill many enemies, or I might be killed by them. It should be impossible for you to be killed by the enemy. Is it because it's unrealistic? This is the first time Saifunjayuan Mirai has told anyone about such inner thoughts, and even the teacher doesn't know. She originally expected Kurosawa Hikaru to chime in, but unexpectedly she was denied. Because you are so beautiful, the enemy general may be reluctant to attack you, and will even give an order to his soldiers that she is not allowed to be killed and must be captured alive. Kurosawa shook his head slightly and said sincerely. To be honest, although you are kind to your enemies, you are cruel to yourself. But for an enemy as beautiful as Saifunjayuan's future, any man would probably not kill him, but would find a way to capture him alive. What happens after we are captured alive? What will happen? It will end badly. Because chatting with her is quite open, Kurosawa Hikaru is not afraid to talk. In fact, in his previous life, he felt that it was a stupid idea for some girls to imagine that they could travel back to ancient times. You must know that the gap in class status in ancient times was very large and even more dangerous. It cannot be compared with modern times. It's like he was reborn as Neon. Even though he is in a foreign country, it is still modern, so he is still lucky. At the very least, this is a world he is familiar with, even if the people in this world are born with colorful hair, which is fundamentally different from his previous life. After all, he has been used to it after staying there for so many years. And not to mention, the colorful hair colors and eye colors are quite beautiful if you see them too much. Well, Saifunjayuan Mirai fell into thinking after hearing this statement. Fantasy about being in ancient times, I think, is a choice to escape reality. Kurosawa Hikaru said before she could think of something bad. Maybe that's true. Saifunjayuan Mirai sat against the wall, folded his hands on his lap, and nodded. You don't want to die, do you? Finding that she didn't deny it, Kurosawa Hikaru suddenly reacted. To die in battle. Just now he only thought about his second-grade fantasy, but now that he thinks about it, it is not simple. Because when people fantasize, they usually think about killing everyone and being invincible. Who would care about how they die in battle? Having such an idea may be a subconscious thing. When Saifunjayuan heard this in the future, he suddenly fell silent. There's no need for this. Kurosawa Hikaru realized that she had really thought about it and said quickly. It's really not necessary. I will be the eldest lady now and the young mistress in the future. Maybe after getting married, I will be liberated. Saifunjayuan nodded in the future and agreed with this. She did think about it, but only for a moment. Although I am under the control of my family now, that may not be the case in the future. Liberation. Kurosawa Hikaru looked at her beautiful profile and couldn't see through her thoughts. For example, as long as I deal with the higher-ups and give birth to an heir, everyone can live their own lives. I don't care about his personal life, and he doesn't care about me, then I will be free. Sifan nodded in the future and explained. As soon as these words came out, Kurosawa Hikaru felt that she really expected this. Since there is no way to escape the marriage arranged by the family, just accept it as it comes and hope for a better result. Speaking of which, if I really live my own life after I get married, how about I support you then? Suddenly, Sifan Mirai turned his head, looked at Kurosawa Hikaru's handsome face with a pair of beautiful ruby eyes, and asked with a smile. Is this a confession? Kurosawa Hikaru stared at her, feeling that she was expressing her true feelings in a joking manner. It's the rich woman's declaration of support. Do you want to consider living on a soft diet? I will give you a lot of money every month. Their eyes met, and Sifan Mirai did not dodge. With her head leaning on her shoulder, her big eyes were smiling, but her words were not a joke at all. Tokyo's Most Affectionate. Author, Wodada Shuchu Wujin. Chapter 110. Kurosawa Hikaru fell silent, not knowing how to answer. Although the tone of the chat was very relaxed and happy, the content of the topic was very heavy. What he saw was not Sifan Jiyuan's beautiful and elegant face in the future, but what lay behind it. It was an almost crazy soul that had been bound and suppressed for many years, looking forward to liberation and freedom. Suddenly, he recalled what Miss Runa said. The stricter the tutoring, the more suppressed her thoughts and ideas. There are definitely things she cannot do that are impulsive in her heart, and she only needs an opportunity to explode. His appearance is undoubtedly the opportunity that Sifan Jiyuan has been waiting for in the future. As long as he says yes, the savage beast suppressed in this girl's heart will break out. What's more, the cage is already crumbling, and the crazy soul is trying its best to get out. Extramarital affairs, foster care, these rebellious and disregarding rules, which were not in line with her true identity and character, were expressed by her as a joke. Why aren't you talking? Don't take it seriously, I was just joking. Seeing that he had been silent, Sifan Jiyuan Mirai suddenly panicked, reached out and patted his shoulder, forcing a smile. The smile that bloomed on that beautiful face should have been stunning, but that smile was a bit bitter and far-fetched. Kurosawa opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he couldn't. Because of the existence of the system, he was certain of one thing. As long as the task can be triggered, it means that the woman has a good impression of him. Today's date mission, one mission goal is shoot her heart with an arrow. This is not physical, but spiritual. Although the system did not explicitly say that it was heartbeat, the principle should be similar. In short, with the completion of the task, her feelings for him were no longer as simple as good feelings. It might have turned into like or falling in love, so she said such words. She has resigned herself to her fate. She will never escape being arranged by her family to marry someone else in the future. Her current behavior is actually asking for help, trying to grab a branch in the quagmire of powerlessness to prevent her from falling. Completely engulfed. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have made such an exaggerated joke. Don't be angry. Because he remained silent, Sifan Jiyuan Mirai was really panicked. He looked around, then leaned over and apologized quietly. It would be too uncomfortable to lose this hard-won friend of the opposite sex because of the joke just now. This apology was humble, like a plea for forgiveness. I'm not angry, I'm just thinking about something. Seeing her like this, Kurosawa Hikaru shook his head and said, What? Finding that he finally spoke, Sifan Jiyuan Mirai breathed a sigh of relief and said in confusion. Did you have the idea of keeping a man after you met me, or did you have it before? Is there any difference? To me, there is a difference. After meeting you, Sifan found that he was a little serious in the future. After hesitating for a few seconds, he lowered his head and whispered in a low voice. To really talk about the birth of this idea, it was when Kurosawa Hikaru took off his half-sleeves and saw the beautiful and sexy left shoulder, as well as the handsome and majestic figure standing with a bow. She had to admit that she was excited at the time. She knew that Kurosawa Hikaru's family background was very ordinary, otherwise there would be no need to be a tutor. The huge gap between rich and poor planted a seed in her heart. As soon as Kurosawa Hikaru knew her fate, it exploded. And she knew one thing very well: Kurosawa Hikaru probably liked her, otherwise he wouldn't have suddenly plucked up the courage to talk to her before. In this case, he might agree to be kept by her. Is that so? Kurosawa Hikaru fell into deep thought again. In fact, he had a way to help Shifunjin get rid of his fate in the future, so he followed Sato Shinichi's suggestion and became famous. But he couldn't easily respond and said that he could marry her. Because this sentence contains responsibility and commitment, and his feelings for Sifan future are only good feelings, and even a little pity. Being close to her just wants to make her happy and relaxed. In fact, Kurosawa Hikaru knew that what he was doing was scumbag, but no one could resist the temptation of system rewards, even if they were talents rather than actual money. Having many skills is not a burden, not to mention these talents, which allow him to have a completely different life. Knowing that his behavior was not good, what he subconsciously did was to make the woman satisfied and happy during the date. Try to give as much as you can, rather than take, to alleviate guilt. Even if they break up and don't date again in the future, he will not regret what he failed to do and how he was ashamed of others. But until the reality faced him, he realized that he had thought wrong. No matter how well he does and how much he gives, he can't leave the other person behind with a clear conscience. In the process of dating, as you get to know each other and get along with each other, the relationship will gradually heat up, and the woman will cherish him more, and so will he. Even if they are friends, after they have been together for a long time, they will feel reluctant if they want to cut off the relationship, let alone the relationship between a man and a woman. If one day, he was asked to choose between Xiaoyuki and Miss Ninomiya, could he choose? He was dating Xiaoyuki, Miss Ninomiya, and even Shifunjin Mirai now. For the reward of the dating task, there might be other women in the future. At the same time, he was free between several women. Maybe his relationship with Shifunjin Mirai was just starting, but who can guarantee that the relationship will stagnate? His relationship with Xiaoyuki also improved with each date and meeting. Are you considering it? Finding that he was in deep thought, Shifunjin Mirai waited for a while, a little impatient, and couldn't help asking. Could it be that I want to support you because of you? This idea premise made Kurosawa Hikaru's heart move. If I say that I am not a good person, what would you think? Kurosawa Hikaru thought for a long time, raised his eyes to meet her eyes, and asked. What can I think? You are not a good person, and neither am I. Shifunjin Mirai, who had expected him to agree, was speechless when she heard this. She just didn't think this guy was an honest and good man, so she couldn't help but propose the idea of keeping him. What if I am a playboy who is two-timing or three-timing? Kurosawa Hikaru found that she might have misunderstood, and after hesitating, he still plucked up the courage to ask. Seriously? Shifunjin Mirai looked at him. Seriously? Kurosawa Hikaru nodded. Finding that he was not joking, Shifunjin Mirai fell into deep thought. It doesn't matter if you use my money to pick up women, but you have to spend more time with me. After thinking for a while, she gritted her teeth and went for it. Although it was a bit uncomfortable, Kurosawa Hikaru was probably the same. After all, she was marrying someone else, and she needed to be liberated and free to keep him. Does your agreement to this matter depend on your marrying someone else and supporting me? Yes. What if you don't have to marry someone else, but marry me? Why so many ifs? There are just so many. If you can really get my grandfather to agree, I'll be fine with 4 or 5 boats, not to mention 3. Although it was a bit troublesome, Shifunjayuan Marai didn't mind fantasizing, and smiled after thinking about it for a few seconds. Maybe it sounds a bit strange, but the education she received since childhood is very traditional, very traditional. Traditionally, Japan abides by monogamy, but there are no regulations about concubines. And her view on marriage is that even if her husband has an extramarital affair after marriage, as long as there are no illegitimate children, she doesn't need to care, and she just needs to sit firmly in the main wife and teach the children.